Thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar with Education Elements. We're going to talk about enrollment marketing and how you can stabilize your revenue with a great plan that focuses on the customer first. A little bit different than what my experiences were in talking about marketing. We're going to do a check-in using the chat. You're coming here today with some knowledge. We're trying to assess, like, hey, what are you coming into this webinar with? What best describes your current marketing strategy at your school, district, or organization? 1, no strategy or action yet. 2, some action, but not strategic. A 3 means that you have some strategy and action, but you need some improvement. And 4, you got to figure it out. You're just coming to see what I had to talk about. You may have been misinformed that I have some special entertainment talent, and that's why you're here. I hope I can deliver on that if you're a 4. I think I can address 1 and 2 and 3, but 4, I'll have to bust out some talent that I don't know about yet. We'll figure that out. So where are you at in the chat in terms of your district, organization, programs, marketing, skills, or talent? 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'm seeing some 3s, some 2s. I'm seeing no 4s. That's good. If you have a 4, I appreciate the confidence. But I feel like that's going to put pressure on me to do comedy, dance, or song, and nobody wants to see that. Seeing some 2s. So again, if you're just joining us, we're checking in right now, just trying to understand where you're coming at. Where you're coming to this webinar with. How would you describe your current marketing strategy? And if you are coming into this webinar just to listen, fantastic. There's going to be a fair amount of engagement in this webinar because I want to get your minds thinking in what I think will be a different way when it comes to marketing your program, your school, or your district. That's me. We have a person who does cartoons and illustrations at our company. So there are cartoon versions of our entire company at Education Elements. That's my cartoon. He has a much fuller beard, I think, than I do. But I was feeling cartoony today, so I used the cartoon picture. My name's Corey Ryan. I'm here in Austin, Texas. I am a partner at Education Elements. About a year and a half ago, I was a chief communications officer in a large suburban school district here in Central Texas. I did that for about 8 years as a chief, and I worked in school PR and marketing for 13 years inside school districts across Texas. I'm an instructor in the Certified Public Communicator program, and I'm certified through that at Texas Christian University. So I work with school and city leaders to provide insight and training when it comes to communicating in a public setting. But first and foremost, I'm a parent to a first grader. So I'm bringing this perspective of somebody who worked in schools, somebody who supports schools now as a partner at Ed Elements. But I'm a parent, and I'm going to share some of my personal experience as a customer within a public school system and a private school system. And we're going to help use that as some examples to guide this through when we talk about customer experience and how that should impact your marketing planning. So why enrollment marketing? So why does this matter? So I'm guessing these aren't going to be numbers that surprise a lot of people because you felt the impact if you're working in schools. Between 2019 to 2022, U.S. public schools have 1.1 fewer students than they did in 2019 and 2022. Obviously, we had the pandemic, but there's other data points that are relevant to this as a new reality. 14 states are focused on or introduced school choice legislation in 2022. Here in Texas, it's still being hotly debated. I'm not here to talk one way or the other about school choice. But the fact is that it's a reality in more states than not, and it's continuing to be addressed in state legislators. So with fewer students and more choice comes this need to be more strategic and to be more competitive when it comes to enrollment. We're going to talk about Texas because I'm going to use this as a Texas case study because that's what I'm most familiar with, but that doesn't mean these numbers aren't applicable to lots of other areas. Fertility rates have been going down for years. In fast growth school districts in Texas, we looked at kindergarten class rates when we had a demographer every year, and kindergarten rates were going down before the pandemic. And you can see that in this Pew study chart where you'll see just nationwide, declining enrollments. The table on the right is the top 10 highest percentage of declining birth rates. And the school business, what that means is fewer students, fewer kindergartners to compete with when it comes to our schools and our programs. In Texas, just to give you some context, because we're going to do a little bit of a Texas case study or case studies here on how this has impacted different districts in different ways. For years, Texas was adding about 70,000 kids a year. So this was the commissioner talking to the legislator around budget issues this year around what do we expect the future of enrollment to look like? And this isn't happening. We're declining in Texas for students for the first time. So in thinking about it, Austin's seen as this high growth area. We used to add by 70,000 students every year, about the size of Austin ISD, a pretty large district in the state. And now that's not happening. I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to name the specific districts these are, but I did want to kind of talk about like the impact, because I worked in a fast growth district and we never had to worry about enrollment. And last year we were worried about enrollment. And I'm going to share some of these stories and experiences that I had in a fast growth district and how enrollment impacted us. So District A is a small mid-sized district inside a major metro area, competitive with charter schools that had moved into the area, and the district had been targeted for some improvement efforts. District B, large district in a major metropolitan area, sustained declining enrollment, competitive charter schools. So charter schools, there's a competitive environment with a large public district and charter schools. And then C is an example of a large suburban district that's in and outside. It's split. It's part suburban, part in a major metropolitan area. This is a district that has a reputation for high-performing schools and has traditionally been in a high-growth area. So when you look at these districts, you see District A, this steady decline. And when you look at a year-over-year annual revenue, so in thinking about students in terms of the revenue that comes with the state, and when we talk about revenue, we have to think about it as this is how we provide these services. In my experience in schools, I'm sure you all have experiences as well. When we talk about revenue in education, oftentimes I've heard parents say things like, or community members, you only care about the money. No, we absolutely care about the students more than anything, but without revenue, without resources, we can't support those students. And when that revenue becomes unstable and unpredictable, that creates bad environments for kids. So A, district, this is what this has looked like. $9.7 million if you look at the basic allotment in Texas and what that means in funding. B, this large fast growth district, you've seen steady start declines, 54.5 million. And then even District C. So you see District C is interesting because it grew, because this is a high growth district that traditionally grows in enrollment, but it went back down. So what ended up happening is that not only did it stop growing, it dropped a little bit as a result of probably a myriad of factors. And that instability, where it is not as big as District B, that instability leads to reduction in force, layoffs, moving teachers around, programs not being able to be taken advantage of, or having to be sunset. Strategic initiatives, you want to address other strategies that impact kids directly in your classrooms. You have less capacity to do that because you're dealing with all these other things as district leaders. And I think that there's a strategy disconnect. So stepping away from working in a public school for the last 16 months has provided a lot of clarity and insight. When I get to work with districts all over the state and nation in my role at Enrollment, and honestly, I wish everybody who works in a job could be able to do that, could be able to step away and to gain perspective, because you really identify things that you did wrong. And I, as a former chief communications officer and marketing coordinator in a school district, I did a lot of things wrong when it comes to enrollment marketing. So what districts typically do and what I did wrong, so I am owning my role in doing this wrong. When it came to declining enrollments, solely dedicating our time into running advertising campaigns, focusing on launching new programs and designs, using school communication systems built for schools to do school things, to do business things like marketing enrollment, and then solely relying on awareness data. So people when I say awareness data, I put some content out there and people saw it. Like In my experience in a school district and working with school districts, the data that we use to drive and measure impact on marketing is mostly, if the data is used at all, around awareness. We did an ad in a newspaper, or we did a billboard and 2,000 people saw it. We did a Facebook ad and 5,000 people saw it. People were aware of your brand. Like, that is where we measure and spend the most of the time. The challenge is that when it actually comes to selecting a product, and this is a quote from The Marketing Rebellion, which is a fantastic book about modern marketing practices, 2/3 of the touch points that you do as a marketer or advertiser are not used in an evaluation, or 2/3 of them are driven by human marketing. So, and when a person is making a selection of a product, 2/3 of the touch points that they're using are not the things that you're producing, which means that people are not trusting of advertising and direct formal marketing. They are more likely to read reviews, social media conversations, word of mouth, recommendations from family, friends, and online experts than they are to watch your marketing. Your marketing is becoming more and more ineffective, no matter how good you do it, because formal marketing is being tuned out. People are using ad blockers on their computers. They're fast forwarding or doing on-demand TV, and they're tuning things out. So what ends up happening is organizations and schools and school districts are just sending more and more, and that's further diluting the messaging as well. Because you're like, people didn't read my email, people didn't look at my ad, people didn't watch my video, let me send it out more. So more has not created better. Maybe it's moved the margin a little bit, but it has not created these uniquely human experiences that actually drive decision-making. And I would attest that this book, The Marketing Rebellion, was about more traditional business. And I think that there is no bigger brand or no bigger organization in a family's life than a school district. So when it comes to making these decisions, we are more likely to lean into a more human-driven experience than we are into a traditional advertisement. Again, the impact beyond revenue when it comes to enrollment is that you don't just lose out on money, and no school district is collecting revenue in a ways to award bonuses or to pay people out. Like, there's no financial gain from school district X in getting more students. What it does is it creates more stability, more predictability, and the ability to take on these important functions of a school district, especially coming out of the pandemic: school improvement, core instruction, to be able to maintain and take care of our facilities. Because when your house is on fire, like, oh my gosh, we are losing 5% of our students every year, or we just lost a bunch of students because our legislator passed a new school choice initiative. Your house is on fire, your school district is on fire. You can't take care of these other things, these other essential things. You just focus on putting out the fire. So if your district, and this is a question if you can answer in the chat, if your district or school can more accurately predict its enrollment over the next 10 years, and it was either stabilized or growing. So if the conditions of this question, if your district or school could more accurately predict your enrollment over the next 10 years, and in addition to being able to do it with accuracy, it was a stable enrollment or a growing enrollment, what could you accomplish? So for example, maybe a district could accomplish, I could accomplish a new, if enrollment was predictable and stable, and you're going to put this in the chat, we could innovate instruction. Thank you, Aaron. More investment in teachers and more innovative with investing in programs. Because if you know what's coming, you know what you can implement, right? Like, you know what you can do. I'd like to see a couple more answers. Balance our local budget. Yes. Expand offerings that are tailored to community needs. Thank you, Rebecca. And with a balanced local budget, create more buy-in from your community. Maybe be able to win more elections that help support schools. Like, these things come in tandem. Better plan for long-term investments in educational products. Thank you. Absolutely, Javier. I want to think about our schools as a brand, because I think when it comes to creating human-centric marketing efforts in your plan, it is more important than it is in normal businesses. And I believe that because kids are the most, your school, I believe, is a disproportionately impacting brand. So I want you to think about a kid in your life, whether it's your own kid or your niece or your nephew, a school-aged kid. And I want you to list on a piece of paper, on a Post-it note, if you want to do it in the chat, that's fine. What are the 5 brands you associate with a school-aged kid in your life? Be sure to include organizations you may not typically think of as brands. So typically, I think when we think of brands, we think of Coca-Cola, Nintendo. We think of these like big companies, but truthfully, your schools, your churches, your other places your kids are connected to are also brands. So in creating your list, make sure you think of an inclusive list. And then next, with each of those brands, estimate how much time your kid spends with that brand in a typical week. For the sake of time, I'm going to go through my son's list, my 6-year-old son's list, to provide some context. So when I did this activity, I thought about my kid. In a typical week, how much time does he spend in each of these brands? He does about 2 hours in sports leagues. Between church and religious education, he's in church for about 2.5 hours. The kid probably spends time thinking about or playing Mario for about 4 hours. Legos are about 8 hours. But in elementary school, he's in school 37.5 hours in a week. Like, it doesn't even come close. So when it comes to people making decisions about their school, we don't make decisions in the same way where I make decisions about buying my son new Legos. So whereas Lego going out and doing an advertising campaign might help you make a decision about selecting a Lego brand, schools just have to do more. These are deeply personal decisions that have a disproportionate impact on families' lives. So when I talk about providing business concepts to schools, I think that you have to lean more into the human element here. And brands like Legos are spending more time doing human experiences than ever before. So if books like The Marketing Rebellion are saying business needs to spend more time away from traditional advertising and more time in these human marketing experiences, to me, that means schools need to do even more than business. And that might sound overwhelming, but I think that with a well-articulated plan, systems, and the ability to leverage technology, not to replace human interaction, but to take care of repetitive tasks and make online experiences more personal to individuals, I think you can create capacity. And also, schools are in the human experience business. Like, creating and being a part of your local community in person is what schools are about. I want to take a second to just, because everybody's probably coming into this webinar with multiple experiences with marketing. So I want to provide some common definitions that we're going to use in describing marketing. So marketing refers to any actions a company takes to attract an audience to a company's product or service through high quality messaging. Marketing aims to deliver standalone value for prospects and consumers through content with a long-term goal of demonstrating value, strengthening brand loyalty, and ultimately increasing sales. That comes from an online platform and marketing tool called HubSpot. And I poked a very businessy definition because in schools, we often replace marketing with communication. We think of marketing as we need to communicate what is happening versus we need to drive action from a consumer or customer base. And I'm telling you that that is wrong. Not that communication isn't critical and not that communication isn't part of brand building, but the act of marketing is different, because if you are trying to get somebody to do something specific, and in the case of enrollment, you are trying to get a family to enroll in your school, that is a different action than I am trying to get information to a family. There's some overlap, but it is a different activity and a different action. So I've mentioned and talked about awareness a few times because I believe that districts and schools and organizations spend a disproportionate amount of time focusing marketing and awareness building. So traditionally, awareness has been, and let's just talk about traditional scopes of awareness and what even modern scopes of awareness should be. Traditionally, awareness is around like advertising. Like, we need people to learn more about our school. Let's run an ad. It's static channels. Static, I mean, like, it's just published and there's no way for people to directly engage with the content of that channel. So a static channel, your website is oftentimes very static in most districts and organizations, meaning that people can go and get information, but it's not dynamic. They can't engage with it, have a conversation with it. Pamphlets, brochures, we need to create a brochure. Like, we got a new program, we need a brochure. Bulk messaging, like districts use their email newsletter system to give information about something they need to market, where it is not necessarily targeted. It's going to everybody on our contact list, whether they're qualified or would be interested to this product or service that we're trying to get people to enroll in. So traditional awareness is reach-based. It's based on how many people can we get in front of. Modern marketing tells us that awareness is like user-generated content. It's not you creating the advertisement. It's somebody who advocates for your brand or your school generating their own content, whether that's on their social media, whether that's how they talk and engage with their friends and community, whether that's they're going and putting reviews on websites. They're engaging channels. So this is places where people can look and read referrals. They can read review sites, and they can have conversations with people who are similar to them, where they see themselves. I am like this parent. I am going to engage with them about their choice in schools. And it's personalized messaging. So it's not bulk messaging where I'm sending the same message to all 50,000 people in my contact list. It is, I am sending a targeted message to the 1,000 people in my contact list who qualify for pre-K. I'm doing an enrollment marketing around pre-K. I don't need to tell everybody about it. I need to target the specific people who qualify for the service and give them a specific message at a specific point in time. It is personalization of marketing, and it's experience-based. Awareness is experience-based because you're creating an experience that captures them where they are in their buying and selection journey, and then their enrollment journey. So I think the missing pieces are thinking about enrollment marketing in terms of a customer's journey, where they are traveling from awareness to knowledge to selection. And you're also focusing on whether or not the people in your school or program, whether or not they are simply attending your program, they're a butt in the seats, or they are openly advocating. Because if experience marketing is where we need to be, they trust the people in your schools to tell them about your schools way more than they trust you to tell them about your schools. Then we need to think about what are the people who are attending and advocating for your schools saying and contributing to this conversation. If we support families as they progress in their customer journey, we can increase and stabilize enrollment. That's the theory of action here. If we can think about individuals in our system and think beyond awareness, awareness is important, but we need to think beyond awareness, then we can have a plan that increases and stabilizes enrollment. So when we think about this customer journey, what touch points matter? What personalized and relevant experiences can we create in our marketing plan? How do we automate in order to personalize the experience and scale in our system? I want you to think about this as we do the next activity. So these are questions to ask about individuals as they go through this customer journey. As they go through these different phases or in these different phases, what are the things that they're doing? What are the touch points that you're responsible for that they interact with? What are the questions they're asking? How are they feeling? What are the existing strategies that you're doing, and what is the ownership? Like, who owns those things? Because the other thing that I experienced in school marketing, and I'm sure some of my school comms folks here have experienced, I was in Harlingen CISD in the Rio Grande Valley. I was specifically hired or promoted within that district to do marketing. And what I found was they saw me as a person that could come in and be responsible for marketing, but didn't create the systems in place where we could expand that capacity, because marketing in a school district cannot live with one person or one department. Because when we're talking about experiences throughout an entire K-12 system, there needs to be systems in place, support structures in place, and a common way that we talk and address individuals in the system and how we relate to customers. So awareness, this is when a family first learns about a specific school as an option. So a family, and I'm very purposely talking about family and not parents, because decisions around school are more complicated than parents. In some cases, the parent might be the sole decision maker. In other cases, the student is going to have a lot of say in that. Families are complicated. You might have a split family that is making the decision-making process. So as a whole, we're talking about families and making this journey, not individual students and not parents specifically, because we know these are complicated. So when a family first learns, awareness is like, I have learned that this is an option for my kid. Options might be driven by multiple factors. Geography, you're close to my school. I'm zoned in your school. Features, maybe I'm looking for a specific program, or if it's coming to private school or a private option, cost. Knowledge. So after I've become aware that your school or program is an option, I am in the knowledge phase. So after I become aware, now is when I'm doing research. So this is where your family is talking to people oftentimes. They might be engaging with your advertising and your materials, but they're oftentimes talking with family members. They're discussing things with other members of your school or district community. And the degrees of influence are starting to be hashed out, and different people might be thinking of different things. So the student in the decision-making process might be thinking about something completely different than the parent, and being knowledgeable of the differentiation is important. Selection is, I have collected the knowledge I needed, and now I am selecting the school. What does your enrollment process look like? Are you losing people in your onboarding process, in your selection process? When people select a new product, that is the happiest they are ever with that product typically. So like when you are like, hey, I need to go buy an Apple Watch. I'm going to go buy an Apple Watch because I need to start exercising and I need the step counter. The most happiest you're going to be with that Apple Watch is the first day you get it, because you have thought as a consumer, I need to solve this problem. The Apple Watch is what I have selected. I've researched. I'm going to solve this problem with the Apple Watch. And now I got it. The future is bright at you at that point in time. The future of you not closing all those rings like I haven't closed all my rings is the future. But at that moment, when you make the selection is when you should be the happiest with your product. But how do we leverage that in our marketing efforts? How do we make sure they have parents and families have a positive experience registering and enrolling in schools? How do we make sure that we take advantage of onboarding students and parents? Attendance. So a parent or family is in the attendance phase where they are engaged in your school. They are enrolled in your school. So they're a part of your school. And now our goal of attendance is we want to move as many people. We want to keep them attending our schools when it comes to enrollment marketing. Retention is huge. Retaining students is huge. But ideally, we want to move people from attendance, simply, I am enrolled in your school, to advocacy. When families are actively supporting schools through word of mouth testimonials, sharing information via digital forums, volunteering, and activism. Because if you work in schools, you know the impact of this. You know that when schools have advocates, they pass more elections, they have better productive school board meetings, they have better school board members. Like when people are openly advocating for your school, those advocates will help do your enrollment marketing. All right, we're going to move to an activity. So if you want to join along in the activity, you can join the Jamboard, or you can answer and respond in the chat, and I'll capture it in the Jamboard as well. We're going to go through a customer journey map. So to do so, I want you to think about a family. It could be your family. It might be somebody else's family that you're familiar with who's on this path, who's either currently on the path of schools or has already gone through a selection phase. And you're going to respond as if you're this person. If you were doing your enrollment marketing right now, I would encourage you to do this activity with individuals in what we call an empathy interview, where you're talking about individuals, talking to specific individuals about their experience in schools, asking them these questions through these different phases, and charting and plotting people on this map as a means for self-reflection. So I want you in the Jamboard, if you're feeling comfortable with some technology, or if you've used Jamboard before, I'm going to put it in the chat. If you're in the Jamboard, feel free to start responding with sticky notes. If you have things that you want to add in the chat, drop it in the chat. We're going to talk about actions first. So somebody who's in the awareness phase, remember, you're thinking about an individual family. That could be your own family. I'm going to think about it as my own family. It could be a family that you're aware of that recently selected a school or is in the process of selecting a school or has selected a school and you're just aware of it. Or you can make up a family. Like if the purpose of this is to reflect. So if you want to make up an imaginary family to reflect on, that's fine too. Again, a practice you would implement this in your enrollment marketing would take this strategy and talk to specific people in your system to collect this information. So we're going to talk about what does it look like for a family in the awareness phase. You could drop these in the chat and I'll go ahead and do so as well. You grab a sticky note like this, make it whatever color makes you feel happy, and put it in the area where actions. So what does the family do in this phase, in awareness? So when I am aware of a school or a program, so I'm going to use the example of last year, my son entered kindergarten. We were very excited to send him to our neighborhood school. July came along in 2021. My son was 5 years old, had been pretty locked down during COVID. And if you remember July 2021, there was another COVID spike. So although we were very excited about sending my son to his neighborhood school, schools in Texas were not allowed by law to do some of the things that pediatricians were recommending for keeping kids healthy during COVID before they could get their vaccination. As a family, we wanted to look at other options and ultimately selected a private school for our son at that time. So when I was going through awareness as a family, what I was doing was I was doing basic research, Googling schools and looking at, I'm just going to go Googling schools as the action. I was Googling schools to see what were my options because I was in a unique space because I never thought I was going to be in the school marketing business. I never thought I was going to be an active school customer. I worked in a school district. It was my neighborhood school district. I wanted to send my kid to our neighborhood school, but I wanted him to be able to be in a small cohort because of COVID, and I wanted him to be able to wear a mask. So for me, I was Googling schools and I was talking to friends with kids in private schools, essentially what I was doing. Because at that time, I knew I needed to make a private school option because public schools were not allowed to force masks and it was impossible to do some of the cohorting that my family felt like was necessary. So if you're in the Jamboard, go ahead, go at your own pace, start dropping sticky notes in here. If you're not in the Jamboard but want to participate, drop them in the chat. I'll capture them. And if you just want to listen and watch, that's okay too. So what touch points are parts of the school? All right, talking to staff about, thank you. So I'm going to set that up as Rebecca right now is just talking to staff. And I'm going to put in questions to capture everything that you wrote, Rebecca. What best dyslexia teachers, who are the best dyslexia teachers to support my daughter in the school? So those are the questions that you were already asking. So that would go here in the questions plot. Talking to staff. So touch points. Website. School website. I was looking at school websites because at this point in time, I was aware of schools being options or trying to determine if schools were options. Online reviews. Awesome. Thank you, Larissa. So the touch points that were specifically in the district's control, I was on the school's website. We looked at social media, like we looked at their Facebook pages to see and get an idea of what the culture was at those schools. It looks like the Jamboard is view only. Let me figure that out. Thank you. Try now, please. All right, so touch points, Kristen, attending Discovery Days open houses. So the questions that I had were around what did the enrollment, like, what was their space? Because I was looking at private schools, like, was there space for my son? Oops. And honestly, at this point in time, like I was like nervous because I did not think that I was going to be in the school selection phase. So I was nervous or anxious, to be honest. Like that's how I was feeling at the time of my school selection process. Yeah, school accountability, letter grade. So application, remember, this is the awareness. This isn't the selection phase. So you might want to put that back somewhere else. Class sizes. So knowledge. So like what knowledge were you collecting? So like this is awareness. So like this is surface level. So some of you might be moving some of this might be surface level to y'all, and some of this might be better moved to knowledge. So knowledge, this is like when you're starting to actually get like in-depth answers. So this is like, is this school right for me? And this is like, this is the collection of information I need to make a decision. That's the difference between these two phases. Just to check a couple of these. I think some of these you might find better belong in knowledge. Awareness is like, I am evaluating whether or not this school is an option for me. And this is, I'm evaluating whether or not I'm actually going to select this school. That's the degree of difference. So question, is there culture and diversity in the school? Didn't copy and paste. Thank you. So to me, once I realized it was an option, like this was when I was starting to ask questions about what were the safety protocols? I was starting to ask, looking at private schools, what were the costs? So whereas I was Googling schools and talking to friends with kids in private schools to get basic information, now that I had narrowed it down to schools that were actually options, I was aware of the schools that were in the option. So I had my list. So like awareness is like, I don't have a list of schools to look at. Knowledge is like, I have my list of 3 schools I'm looking at. So now I'm having detailed conversations with friends. I had a friend in particular who was a school board member on a private school who sent his daughter there, and I was talking to him. I had a Catholic school we were looking at. We went and visited. So touch points. This for me in my customer journey, I was taking school visits at this time. I went and visited a Catholic school to go talk to the principal and learn about what was going on. Student teacher ratio. This is where I was starting to ask and identify, because, you know, when you're in knowledge, you're trying to figure out what is the information I need to know to make a decision. How is this school different than the others? This is when I was I needed to answer that. I needed to know, how is this different? And honestly, for me, like, how will my son feel about the school? Now, he was just entering kindergarten, so it was good because he didn't know what he didn't know. He didn't go to daycare or anything. So my personal feelings at this point, when I was a parent and collecting knowledge, is I was starting to feel better. Because I was seeing options and feeling like I had some choice, because I felt like I was put in a place where I didn't want to be, because I wanted to be in my neighborhood school. All right, so selection. So what actions are people actually taking when they select your school? So enrollment, registration. Those touch points, the enrollment website. So in the selection phase was when I was starting to get some of those, what are the logistical considerations? I.e., how do I get to school? Or school, i.e., like school meals. These are things that I wanted to know that weren't going to drive my decision making. I didn't necessarily need to collect these in knowledge. For me, some people, these do impact knowledge, but I needed to get these to get my kid enrolled in starting school. Bell schedule. So when you're doing an interview with people and you're doing this as part of your planning, selection is a good time where you can start to identify, what does that actual enrollment process look like? I was not a parent in my public school that I worked in ever, because I ended up sending my son to this private school for 6 months in 2021. I worked in schools for 13 years. I never was a parent in schools. So I really needed to talk to parents about these things, because I didn't know what it looked like from a parent. And I mentioned, in a school district I work in Harlingen, I was responsible for enrollment marketing specifically. And I'll tell you, I was focusing on awareness as a communications professional. That's what I thought was the most important. So I was sending social media, doing videos, putting out print materials, doing advertising campaigns. And it was getting frustrating because the process for actually enrolling in our schools wasn't like, we weren't seeing any new students. I had the lone responsibility. I was the marketing coordinator. So it was when the superintendent asked what we were doing and how we were doing, that came to me. But I was frustrated because I felt like I only had limited amounts of control. When I went and talked to the department about, hey, what's happening with enrollment, and like, why isn't this happening? What I encountered was, I knew we did not have an online system. It was all print a public, go or print an application and fill it out manually. I knew that. I did not know that this office was only open really 1 hour a day, because the person had dual responsibilities and wasn't there all the time. I didn't know that they needed certain points of identification that we weren't communicating or marketing. So people were, even if they showed up, they might not finish the process there. So I had to go out and collect all of that. So going and doing the interviews is where you can really find some things that might cover some of your blind spots, especially when it comes in here. And honestly, when we picked the school, like, I felt really good. My son liked it. It was a private school that had like a chicken coop. It had kids so kids like got to do activities around farming. And at that time, like, it felt really good because we got a school that was doing some of the safety protocols that my son's public school couldn't do. So attendance, like, what are people doing in this phase when they're attending school? Like, they're sending their kid to school. They're participating in activities. Kids are learning, engaging, and having an assigned teacher. So where this one becomes more important is thinking about these questions. Because especially with this lens of how do I get families from simply attending our schools to advocating for our schools? And because we're running out of time, this is the one that you're probably most familiar with. I'm going to move on to advocacy. So when people are in this advocacy phase, families are in this advocacy phase, oftentimes what they're thinking, how can I help? And I think what we need to do in schools is consider, how do we create and plan for, in your marketing enrollment plan, how do we create authentic experience so our advocates who are trusted in their communities more than you are, like as a member of the institution, the advocates of your brand, of your school, are more trusted than you are. How do we do so? How do we give them what they need to help, but do it in an authentic way? Because if you just say, here's a list of talking points, or here's some marketing material, go and do it, it will still come across as marketing. Ideally, what we do, and the book that I shared earlier, Marketing Rebellion, uses some examples specifically of Nike. We need to provide people a mechanism or a training or a system where they feel comfortable telling stories about your school in their own voice and experience. They know, like, these are the things that we want to get across, but they reframe them and put them in their own voice, because that is the highest degree of trustworthiness that we can get. So actions when people are advocating, they're posting positive stuff on social media. They're actively saying positive things to friends. So a difference between advocacy and attendance, this person might be happy. They might not be happy, and they might re-enter this. They might go backwards, because this is like a continuum, right? Like you could go backwards in this phase. If you are attending a school, you're okay, you're happy, potentially, or you're unhappy. You might go back and saying, hey, do I really need to reconsider this school? Do I need to go back into knowledge and do research as to what my options are? Advocacy is you're more likely staying where you're at. You are actively supporting things. You're voting for school bonds. So some of these touch points of somebody who's advocating, they're participating in volunteering and volunteerism, serving on committees. So what do these experiences look like? Feelings, like, how do I feel during these phases? If you're an advocate, you feel great. You feel like mission driven, right? Like if you do advocacy right, you feel like you're a part of a team that's doing great things. It's the same reason why everybody joins public education. You join public education because you decide, or join education. I don't mean to limit it strictly to public education, but you decide to make to work in education because you believe that you are making a difference. And your advocates can feel that way absolutely as well, if you give them what they need. And you give them something to do. If you don't give an advocate something to do, they're like, if you don't engage your advocates, they can quickly go back. And I encountered that in schools. Had the most well-intentioned super volunteers in schools, we did not give them a means to advocate, so they created their own means. And you want to have that authentic engagement. You want people to do things and feel comfortable posting on your community Facebook pages. But when it's going really well, it's in alignment with what you would want them to be saying. So it's this delicate balance. I need you to be in this conversation in your own way, but I really want it to be aligned with where we want to be as an organization. So it's this autonomy push and pull. So in thinking on this process, what are some problems? Like, what are some problems that you identify that are common to people in your organization? Go ahead and put them in the Jamboard, put it in some chat. So what are the problems that your customers are experiencing along their customer journey? I'll go first. Problem is, I don't know. I can't easily access basic information about a school instructional model. So right now, one of my big things as a parent is that my son's school, the problem that I'm having in the attendance phase of this, because my son's in attendance, but I'm not in advocacy in my son's school right now, is because I don't have a good way to understand easily, like, what does instruction look like in my son's school? That's my personal example. What other problems do you see people have in this customer journey? Drop them in the chat. Enrollment process has a lot of paperwork. It takes a lot of time. Thank you. Anything else? Everyone's doing really well in this complex customer journey. I'm going to list a few more. Problems from a school district. I can't easily differentiate or personalize messaging. Human or personal experiences are hard to scale, i.e., we have other jobs. So time. The other part of this is to take these and rephrase them as questions. And then the next step would be to take these questions and form solutions or form strategies that can address some of these questions. So I can't easily access basic information about a school's instructional model. How can we better tell our families about what instruction looks like in our classrooms? Enrollment process. Let's match these colors. Enrollment process has a lot of paperwork and takes a long time to fill out. How can we make our enrollment process easier? I can't easily navigate or differentiate personalized messaging. How can we provide personalized messaging to our customers / families? Human or personal experiences are hard to scale. Like, we got other jobs. Let's make this one pink. So the question here would be, after you did your mapping, how do we fit it all in? Provide families personalized experience, how we fit it all in with providing personalized experiences with our other job duties. All right, well, thank you for jamming with me. Again, the way that I would do this in creating your marketing plan is that I would do empathy interviews. And in those empathy interviews with members of your school or district community, I would ask them questions in these areas. I would collect as many experiences as I could, and then I would do some sort of strategy session or strategy building where you're starting to theme collect ideas and start to identify common trends. So that's the activity to put into your project plan. Question, what would be the impact of increasing your advocates by 10%? You know, enrollment and revenue stabilization, we talked about the money factor. In Texas, it's $6,200 is the state allocation for average student, the annual compensations. We talked about that. But when we think about enrollment wholeheartedly in customer journey, we talk about advocacies. So you can put it in the chat if you want. If not, keep it to yourself. That's fine. But like, what would the impact of increasing your advocates by 10%? If you had 10% more advocates in your system, what would that impact be? Here are the other layers or levels of how we would approach enrollment marketing at Elements and things that you can build at if you're going through this journey. Spending time planning and aligning your work. Developing a project team, because again, it can't just be one person. Enrollment marketing needs to be jointly owned. Doing engagement, collecting information. Starting to develop with your teams of whoever is going to be part of this thought leadership. Like these are the things you're starting to create with the information you've gathered. Designing materials. Yes, you will receive this deck and this will be recorded. This is being recorded, so you'll be able to access this after. Launching your campaign. And then that progress monitoring, identifying those metrics and making sure you're making and keeping up with those. So we believe at Elements we're a good partner for this because we have people who have done this in schools. We've had people who've done this in large suburban schools. We have people who've done this work in large charter schools. So we actually can provide multiple different perspectives of this as well. Our work typically involves strategy and change management, facilitation and execution, coaching and capacity building. So building a system that works for you. I want to thank y'all for your time, for jamming with me. I am dropping a survey in the chat right now. If you could use our remaining 2 minutes before you zoom off to the next thing. If you can help do that. The slide deck will be sent to everybody tomorrow. I want to thank y'all for your time, for your attention, and hopefully your feedback.